Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of What's New in Prisma, where we're discussing the latest Prisma release, latest news in the Prisma community and ecosystem. Hey, Ryan, how are you doing today?
Hey, I am doing well. Things are good here. How about you?
I'm doing great as well. I don't know if you noticed, but over the last couple of episodes, my hair grew longer and longer. And I'm excited to say that I have an appointment for a haircut tomorrow. Finally, the hairdressers have been reopening here in Berlin. So I've got my appointment tomorrow. And in 2 weeks, I'll be back with a fresh haircut. I see you already got yours.
Yeah, mine grew shorter since the last stream. The haircut that I got last week, it's the little things these days with this pandemic, right? That was like the best haircut I've had in my life because it had been, 4 months? It was getting way too long and just felt like, it just felt like taking off lots of layers that were weighing me down. So I'm happy for you. I'm excited for your upcoming haircut. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I actually think I'm going to lose some weight. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. We have a couple of really interesting things that we want to talk about today. So, of course, as usual, we'll discuss Tuesday's release 2.18 and the things that are new and changing in Prisma. And we have two guests today. So the first one will be our colleague Alex, who published an article about TypeGraphQL and specifically about building CRUD APIs with TypeGraphQL and Prisma a couple of days ago, and we'll walk through that. And then we'll talk about the upcoming Prisma Enterprise Event with our customer success manager, Vladi, that I'm also really excited about to introduce here on the stream. And we'll likely have a little bit of time in the end. So for everybody who's watching right now, make sure to drop your questions in the comments because we'll be able to pick them up at the end of the stream and talk a little bit about the things that you always wanted to know about Prisma. But maybe before we start talking about the release today, Ryan, I think you do quite a bit of stuff on the side as well next to your job here at Prisma, actually. And one of the things that you're doing, I think, is hosting a podcast called the Entrepreneurial Coder Podcast. What is that about? Maybe you can explain that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So, I do a podcast, like you said, called the Entrepreneurial Coder. And because I'm into, I'm a big fan of, business stuff around the coding ecosystem, stuff like developers making their own products, doing a little side hustle, selling their things, or even developers doing startups, this kind of thing. I wanted to get to know more about that with people that are doing those sorts of things. So I started this podcast a couple of years back, and it's interviews with developers who are also, building things, starting businesses, selling products. Info products is a lot of the people that I have on. So, because a lot of developers are interested in doing that kind of thing, using their skills and making a bit of money on the side with it, I figured this is a good way to help people out to learn the ways that you can do that, essentially. So if there's anybody who's listening who is interested in that kind of thing, it is ecpodcast.io, and maybe I can even put that into the chat. I'll just grab it here. You can have a listen to some of the recent episodes. What's up recently? I interviewed a guy named Michael Lynch on how to consistently rank on Hacker News. That is an interesting topic for a lot of people. I did an interesting interview with Kyle Matthews recently of Gatsby, and he was telling the story about Gatsby starting and how to think about whether you should start a startup and these kinds of things. So anyway, if you're into that business side of developments, you might be interested in some of these interviews. So check it out.
Very nice. Yeah, a couple of really high-profile guests, I think, that you had on there next to Kyle Matthews. I think you also talked to Swix before, whom a couple of people might know from the Twitter sphere, and just overall a couple of really nice guests. So definitely worth checking that out if you haven't already.
Yeah, absolutely. That is true. And yeah, hopefully you get some value out of it. So thanks for mentioning that, Niko. And yeah, hopefully people can check that out and get some good tidbits.
Cool. And then another interesting thing that happened in the web development ecosystem this week was the Auth0 acquisition.
Yeah.
And I think you also might have a special relationship to that, because you used to work at Auth0 actually,
Right.
before you joined Prisma. So have you followed that? And like, what are your thoughts, also speaking maybe a little bit from the perspective of someone who worked at Auth0, what this means for the company and the future?
Yeah, I was very it was very interesting to see that. It kind of came out of the blue. I kind of thought there was going to be an IPO for Auth0 either this year or next year. That was the sense that I was getting. Just, given how the trajectory that I was witnessing while I was there, and that of course continued well after I left. And so I was thinking it was going to be an IPO. So it was an interesting turn of events that they got acquired by Okta, was what happened. Acquired by Okta for $6.5 billion. And it's an interesting deal, because Okta and Auth0, they like compete kind of with each other. Okta's got a line of products that do some of the same kinds of things that Auth0 does. But I think this deal is interesting because they'll end up being pretty complementary. Like Okta is very enterprise focused, like integrating apps with one another and solving the whole like identity story around that. And Auth0 is very developer focused, helping developers, do authentication and identity and stuff like that in their applications. So interesting deal. Definitely excited to see where it goes. And Auth0's got a special place in my heart, because that was my very first tech job. That was my foray into the tech industry, and so wouldn't be where I am today without the people there. So I'm glad to see that they are succeeding in many ways, and I'm hoping for the best for them for the future.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. I think that's enough about the broader web development ecosystem, and we can turn towards Prisma specific stuff. Do you want to start talking about the release that happened on Tuesday, Ryan, and just walk us through the release notes today?
Yeah.
I think that we'll probably spare the demos today, because most of the things that we have released on Tuesday were kind of smaller changes and important changes that we needed to make, but not really anything in terms of new features that we have been releasing. And that's mostly because all of our teams are very busy working on somewhat bigger things behind the scenes, such as the MongoDB connector, such as working towards the GA launch of Prisma Migrate, so launching it for general availability. And then, of course, we also work on a cloud product that people will be able to use together with the open source tooling of Prisma. So a couple of things that are happening behind the scenes that mean that the releases at the moment might not have as many new features as usual, but this is going to change very soon and very quickly again.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So like you said, pretty simple release. I'll share my screen just to walk through the release notes here. So let me know if you've got this. Looks like it's up.
Yes, it's up.
So 2.18, it's here at the release tag of 2.18. And just a few things to talk about. Nothing that is super groundbreaking in this release, but stuff that you'll want to pay attention to. One is a rename of Prisma Introspect to Prisma DB Pull. And the reason this has been renamed is because we have this other command that was released just a while ago, which is Prisma DB Push. So DB Push, that's where you start with a model, a Prisma model, and you want to get that model into your database. You want to create some tables from it and create those columns and relationships and all that. So introspect is kind of the opposite side of that, where you start with a database and you want to pull out the structure into your model. So we said, you know what, it makes best sense if these are kind of like in the same sort of vein terminology wise. So really all that's changed is Prisma introspect becomes Prisma DB pull. The introspect command will be around for a little while to come. A future release will remove it. It's not too much to talk about there beyond that. I've got a video up though, if you want to see me talk a little bit about it. It's right here. Perhaps we can grab this this link, or you can just look this up. It's using the Prisma DB pull command on YouTube. You should find it there. Not too much to it though. Pretty simple. Next thing to talk about. relation syntax stuff. I had never encountered this myself, this particular issue, but here's the deal. We've got kind of this auto completion for relations, right? If you wanted to do a relation between two models, you can, say that like this user has many posts, and then you could, if you're working on your model in VS Code, you could save it. And if you've got the Prisma extension installed, it's just going to autofill that relation. It's going to expand it out for you. So that still happens. That's still there. But there were some scenarios where that kind of thing was happening automatically. Again, I had never run into this myself, but it was being run automatically, for example, when you would do Prisma migrate. And that ended up causing more issues than it was solving, is the story there. So instead of an automatic insertion of a relation, if you have an invalid relationship set up, like in this case, author to user, not valid because there's no relation attribute. Instead of autofilling that, when you do stuff like Prisma migrate, it's you're gonna have to take care of that upstream instead.
Exactly,
so
and I think. Sorry.
Yeah,
and the main point here really is that we're now kind of removing a little bit of magic and enforcing people to actually understand how relations are being built up in a Prisma schema, because the way before, as you said, could just lead to a couple of really weird errors that were hard to understand for users, and then on the other hand, also harder to debug for ourselves when our users reported them. So we thought that it's probably better here to err on the side of being a little bit more explicit in the schema, and requiring our users to understand also a little bit better about how relations actually work in the Prisma schema. And I think that's kind of the idea behind this change.
Yeah, totally. So a little bit more work for developers initially, but it's hopefully going to lead to fewer confusing points as you go. When when magical things can tend to do that, hopefully it'll be a bit more clear for developers. The next one, more flexible seeding. I don't know too many of the details around this one, but from what I gather here, the Prisma db seed command could run into issues with TypeScript in certain environments, for example, Next.js. So you can do this TS node option thing in your package JSON. Do you know much about this one, Niko? I haven't experienced this before. I'm not too clear on what exactly is going on here.
So to my understanding, before this release, the way how seeding was executed was just with a plain TS node command, and probably picked up the configuration and the options from your TS config. And if you were in a certain environment where the TS config needed to be different compared to the seeding, then you were in trouble, because then the seeding command would automatically have picked up the options from the TS config, potentially would have thrown some errors. So now you're able to kind of take the two apart and have one TS config that's for your broader project, and then on the other hand, for the seeding command, you're able to override these config options to explicitly execute the TS node command. That's my understanding. I'm not 100% sure that this is accurate, but at least that's what I understand from this change.
Yeah. And if there are users out there who have run into issues around that, hopefully this is the solution for you. Check it out and let us know. The last thing to talk about here is on the Go client. So if there are any Go users out there, you've now got an upsert API for Go. I'm not a Go user myself, but this is what it looks like. You do a post ID set upsert. Upsert is, for those who don't know, it's if there is an existing record, you update it, and if there's not, you create one. So the upsert API is there for Go now. Bunch of fixes and improvements. You can read through these at the on the release notes. I won't go through those. That is about it for this release. Again, a small one, but there's lots of cool stuff cooking, and there will be much more to talk about in the future. But that is 2.18.
Yes, that's all for this release. And of course, if you want to know what is coming up in the next releases and what we're actually working on, you can check out the roadmap. So I just dropped the link to that in the comments as well, so that you can pick it up from there and get a good overview of what our engineering team is working on. All right, next topic. Let's bring on Alex, who has published an article about TypeGraphQL. So here is Alex. Nice to see you on the stream again. Let's rearrange this properly here.
Yes.
Hey, Alex.
Hey.
All right, you already have been on the stream, Alex. A couple of okay. Who's doing? Okay, we're trying this in parallel. All right,
Yes.
I'll let you do it. Go ahead. Let's switch
Okay.
the pictures. Yes. All right. You have been on the stream already a couple of weeks ago in the holiday special and introduced yourself back then. So I don't think we need another kind of thorough introduction. If people are interested in who you are, they can go back to that episode or even go ahead and follow you on Twitter, where you're also tweeting about the stuff that you're working on in Prisma. And recently, you wrote and published an article about building a GraphQL CRUD API with TypeGraphQL and Prisma. So today we want to talk a little bit about that article. And I think for starters, it would be nice to just talk about what TypeGraphQL actually is and how it kind of fits into the GraphQL toolchain that developers might be using. So if you could explain just a little bit what TypeGraphQL actually is to give the audience an overview.
Okay, so TypeGraphQL is a library that is used for constructing your GraphQL schemas. Typically you would use an SDL-first approach, but with TypeGraphQL, you use a code-first approach and also in an object-oriented approach. Yes, it allows you to use resolvers, decorators and classes to define your resolvers, as well as adding a couple of, what are they called? Auth guards or guards, such as max length and the likes, while defining a schema. Yes.
Very nice. So it's a GraphQL library to construct GraphQL schemas. And as you already mentioned, there are more ways to do that, right? People might be familiar with the SDL first approach and other libraries such as GraphQL Nexus. So how does TypeGraphQL specifically compare to these two libraries that people might have heard of already? What's different about TypeGraphQL compared to SDL first and to GraphQL Nexus?
TypeGraphQL versus Nexus, TypeGraphQL is strictly TypeScript, and it uses an object-oriented approach, meaning you get to use the classes and decorators while defining your resolvers. And unlike Nexus, it's a little bit open and it works with both JavaScript and TypeScript. And for TypeScript versus SDL first, in SDL, you would define your schema in a string format, and then you would have to define your resolvers separately. And like in TypeGraphQL, you only have to define your schema in using the code first approach, and it would later on generate your schema for you. Yeah.
All right. So maybe you could share your screen and show just on a high level the code for what it looks like when I want to define a GraphQL schema with TypeGraphQL. And I think you made a really important point here when you said that TypeGraphQL is object-oriented and is based on classes. And I think that's really the main point that's different compared to a tool like Nexus or like SDL first, where you don't use classes, you don't use decorators. So what does it look like when you do that with TypeGraphQL?
So with TypeGraphQL, your schema would look something similar to this. You would use the object type decorator and a class as well.
Maybe you can increase the font size a little bit, or just zoom into the browser window a little bit more.
No problem.
Let's see. Or actually, I think it's probably visible.
Yes. So yes, you would use a class and a decorator to define your schema, or rather your GraphQL object type, which would later on perhaps be turned into something similar to this, which is a type recipe. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Yes. So this object type would be translated to something like this for you by TypeGraphQL. And if we, yes, and for your mutations as well, and queries, TypeGraphQL will generate such a schema for you. Yes.
Okay, so it is, again, basically just another way for me to define the GraphQL fields, the GraphQL types that I want to have in my schema, and then also implement the actual resolvers that map to these fields, right? But as opposed to like Nexus, where I have the t.field API that I can use to do that, or with SDL first, where I write the schema definition as a string and then map resolvers to it. It's a third kind of approach where I use decorators to tell TypeGraphQL where I want the resolver to sit. And then it'll generate the GraphQL SDL from that class-based type definition.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, very nice. And how would I go about now? And if I wanted to use Prisma together with TypeGraphQL, what would be kind of the most straightforward approach of integrating the two?
Okay. Oh, first of all, you'll have to set up your GraphQL server using your preferred library, whether that's Apollo server, Mercurius. There are so many out there. And it should be noted that you can use Prisma. You can, in your resolvers as they are, using the Prisma API, whether it's find unique, find many, and the rest, or you can use a pretty cool library by Michelle, the author of TypeGraphQL, which offers a neat integration that allows you to generate this CRUD API by just defining the schema. So what that would look like is you would first have to install a couple of packages when using TypeGraphQL. So you need to use TypeGraphQL and a couple of two more libraries, the GraphQL type.json and the GraphQL fields for aggregate and group by to work properly. And the next thing you would need is to define, since if you are working with Prisma, you will have your schema.prisma defined somewhere, which would look something like this with specific models that map to your database. So you would just next insert the generator into your Prisma schema just below the client generator. And there are a number of ways you can, the next step is to generate the Prisma client, and there are a number of ways of doing that. You can either run npx Prisma generate, or have a DB push, or run a migration in order for the type GraphQL generator to be invoked. So what that looked like over here would be, we just have to run npx generate. Which would then take a couple of seconds to generate your Prisma client and type GraphQL generators, or resolvers. And it should also be noted that these types that are generated are saved inside your node modules. You can override that path and you can have them anywhere in your application. Yes.
Okay, is that would that be the same approach as you do for the client generator by just adding the output field to the generator?
Yes.
Okay, I got it.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure why this is taking a while. Yeah.
There you go.
There we are. So the Prisma client is generated, and then the type GraphQL integration is added. And then the next thing is to just import your resolvers from the generated types into your schema, and the emit schema file just creates your SDL file once the server starts. And according to my package JSON file, the next command to run is npm run dev at the server. This is where we pray to the demo gods that everything goes well. Yeah. And yes, and the server is running. So if we come over to the GraphQL playground, 1000. And let me zoom in a little bit here. If you go to the doc section, you will be able to see all the different queries and resolvers that TypeGraphQL generates for you. TypeGraphQL also generates, you can be able to inspect the schema, and that's mostly it. If we test this out, I had inserted 1 or 2 records, I think. So what that would look like, initial startup is usually long sometimes. Yeah. It also takes care of your relations as well. So I think we have a categories, which has a name. I'm not sure whether I had one. So yes, okay, yes.
Very nice. And so, like, maybe you could quickly show again the code, the project. And to recap, we have a full CRUD API here where we can query the different Prisma models that you have defined in your schema. So, like, very quickly, maybe you can show again the models in your Prisma schema so that people know kind of what kind of models we were actually dealing with in your Prisma schema. So we had a product model, we had a category model, we had an order model, we had all of these.
Yes.
And what does your source folder actually look like? Inside your source folder, you really only have a single file that's the index file for your entire project, where you import resolvers. And that's all you need to do in order to get this complete CRUD API here without having to define anything yourself, basically. So I think that especially for prototyping, when you just want to get a project off the ground and you don't really care about the structure of your GraphQL API at first, then this is just a terrific tool because you don't have to code anything in order to be able to connect the front end to your fully fledged API already. So that's really, really nice.
Yes, it is. It's one of the reasons I love integration. Yes.
All right, cool. And you wrote an extensive blog post about exactly that project with these models and with this workflow. I will drop the link to that in the comments so that people can look it up. Building a CRUD API for your database with TypeGraphQL and Prisma. So if you're interested in that, then definitely go ahead and read Alex's article.
Yes.
All right, Alex. Thank you so much for joining us today, and see you soon.
Cool. Okay. See you soon. Yes.
Cheers, Alex. All right. Yeah. These kinds of small glitches here happen because like basically Alex and I are trying to shuffle things around in StreamYard at the same time. And there are race conditions happening where we both click the button at the same time and things just flicker and pop up again. Very nice. Very nice. Have you worked with TypeGraphQL personally, Ryan, or have you been focused on Nexus and SEL first so far in your endeavors?
Yeah, mostly Nexus. I have played with TypeGraphQL, and it looks really cool. There's an adapter that we showed off one time, right? Like the Prisma adapter that we showed off.
Right. It actually was that integration, I think. So yeah. We talked about it already in like an earlier episode, but because Alex just published this article, I think it might be good, or it could have been a good idea to refresh that and bring that again to people's minds, especially also because if you want to have this CRUD API generated for a Prisma schema, really TypeGraphQL today is the only real viable option. Mm-hmm. And that's because, of course, the Nexus plugin or the Prisma plugin for Nexus is currently being rewritten and is in this kind of limbo state. But also the good news here is that we're making a lot of progress on the plugin, and hopefully very soon we'll be able to launch the next version of it, which will then enable similar capabilities as the TypeGraphQL integration, where you can just expose your Prisma model via GraphQL and hopefully CRUD resolvers and all that kind of good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, TypeGraphQL is cool though. I did enjoy the little bits of work that I did with it, so I'm excited to delve into out more.
Nice. All right, time for our next guest, I think. Let's bring up Vladi.
Hey, Vladi.
Hey,
Hello.
Vladi, good to see you.
Good to see you guys as well.
All right, you haven't been here on the stream, so you will definitely get a chance to introduce yourself a little bit more thoroughly than Alex, and then also talk about the work that you do here at Prisma, and of course, about the upcoming enterprise event that we are cooking up. So to kick things off, maybe, Vladi, you could just introduce yourself to the audience and talk a little bit about your background.
Sounds good. Yeah, so my name is Vladi. I'm a customer success manager. I'm currently based in Italy, near Vicenza. That's in the northeast of Italy, but I'm originally from Serbia. And I also lived 6 years in Dublin, Ireland. And so that's why my accent is a bit mixed. But yeah.
Very cool. And before joining Prisma, I think you used to work at MongoDB. And to say this out already, we did not hire you to work on the MongoDB connector, but for a kind of different area of work, of course. But what kind of work did you do at MongoDB?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me preface by saying that I'm a huge MongoDB champion, so I'll definitely be cheering up for the MongoDB work that we are doing. But I actually work for MongoDB as a senior customer success manager. So I work with our strategic customers, such as large enterprises with big, complex organizations that had multiple MongoDB projects in production. And my role was to help them fully leverage the MongoDB solution. So implement the database as they needed it, enable their teams, and ensure they were getting the most out of their subscription so they could truly see business value out of it.
Very nice. And what motivated you then to join us over here at Prisma?
Yeah, that sounds a bit like an interview type of question, but I'm ready. Yes, so there were several reasons why I was so attracted to Prisma. I definitely wanted to come back to a startup type of environment where I could truly shape the customer success program. But I also love the product and the company mission. I mean, democratizing data and helping developers be more effective in their day-to-day job. It's very much also similar to the MongoDB mission. So making data stunningly easy to work with. And so it felt like a very smooth transition for me from MongoDB to Prisma, as they're very much complementary technology and have very similar missions as well.
That was a great answer. You got the job, Vladi.
Yes.
All right. So, yeah, I think you're bringing kind of a similar mission then to your work at Prisma. Is there anything that you kind of like personally want to achieve here, or that you like what your personal targets are here at Prisma? If you want to speak a little bit to that, and then we can talk about the enterprise event.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll definitely give you a ballpark type idea of what my mission is, but it'll definitely evolve over time, being the first CSM in Prisma. So I see my mission as twofold. Definitely internally, I want to help Prisma understand who are the Prisma users and how they're using the product. So think about, what type of use cases, what are the features most important to them, and also what are their biggest pain points so that we can add those to the roadmap. But I also want to help the Prisma users make the most of our product. So making adoption as frictionless as possible for them.
Very, very nice. All right. Yeah, then let's talk about one big project that you are currently working on, and that's the Prisma Enterprise Event. What is that?
Yeah, I'm so excited about this event. This is my very first event in Prisma, and I very much look forward to it. So it'll be focused on discussing the Prisma vision for enterprises and how it's currently being used in production in various companies. Now, I know you've discussed the Prisma roadmap with our viewers before, and you've mentioned MongoDB, so I won't be giving any sneak peeks about that. But I'm happy to walk you through how the registration page looks like. So let me actually go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Prisma event. Okay, so you guys should be able now to see the event registration page. It's at prisma.io/enterprise-event-2021. But yeah, we have a great lineup of speakers. You can find them here, and also a great lineup of sessions as well. Now, we haven't published the schedule yet, but you don't have to wait for the schedule to be published to register. In fact, you can register right away, and I may have jumped the gun a bit, and I have already published the schedule on the event hosting platform. So if you do register, you'll get the sign-in details, and as soon as you sign in, you can then see the schedule and customize your own agenda there.
That sounds fantastic. If you could quickly scroll down again, I just want to take a quick look at the speakers again and see who we have there. So really people from all over the industry, and of course a lot of Prisma folks as well to talk about some specifics, I guess. And yeah, one interesting theme, I think, of that entire event, and that's one thing I think that especially big companies and enterprises are dealing with, is how can they make data available across their entire organization, right? Because typically in these bigger organizations, you have individual teams and departments that kind of have their own setups, their own processes and ways how they work with data. And if you want to innovate as a big company, then this is a challenge, because it's oftentimes convenient for a user to be able to have a more holistic perspective of the entire data a company might have. But because only a single department can access its own data, there is kind of this problem of like these silos that are being created. And I think one major theme of the entire event will be how to make data available across an entire organization and enable developers to quickly make use of the data that's there, so that they can build products that actually innovate and help their users. And that indeed is also kind of what we are trying to do with Prisma in the future, right? That's the idea of the entire application data platform that we eventually want to build, is that it becomes easier for developers across an organization to access and manage data in various ways. So I think this is super interesting, and I'm really excited for that event taking place at March 25th, I think. Is that today in 3 weeks? Exactly to the day?
Yes.
21 days, right?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah, it's going to
right.
be in the afternoon for the European audience and in the morning for the US audience. So definitely a bit of a middle ground for everyone.
Very nice. All right, Vladi, is there anything else that you want to share, or should we let you go?
I'm happy to go, but thank you very much for having me here, and I look forward to the next spotlight.
All right, thank you, Vladi. See you soon.
Thank you. See ya. Bye.
Bye. All right, that's exciting. Looking forward to the enterprise event.
Me too. It's gonna be good.
All right. I think we have a couple of things that we want to plug today, and then we'll grab some questions from the comments. And so far, I think I've only seen 2 or 3 questions that have been raised. So everybody who's watching and you have anything that you want to know, feel free to drop it in the comments. We'll pick it up in a couple of minutes. But first, Ryan, I think we have a few things that we want to share that's coming up or that we have published internally.
Yeah, let's do it. So yeah, a couple things to plug. We have this course here, End-to-End React with Prisma 2. This is by Steven Jensen. He came on this show to talk about this. Was that the last time or the time before? Can't quite remember.
Before, I think, yeah.
In any case, we have a discount code for this. Maybe you can pop that into the chat even there, Niko.
Yes, I'll drop it.
I can't remember how much you get off, but you get a discount from this price. It's in Canadian dollars.
Yeah, I think you just get it for free, actually. So you don't have to pay anything to take the course.
You get to do it totally for free. Check it out. Highly rated. Lots of students. People like this course. So if you are interested in Prisma with React, do check it out. And the best way to find that, Niko can put the link in, but if you just go to Udemy and you search for this title, End-to-End React with Prisma 2, you will find it there. Another thing to talk about, we just did yesterday, we hosted another installment of GraphQL Berlin, this meetup that we do. And yeah, that was yesterday. And the recording from this should be up, I believe. Yes, it is. It was streamed to YouTube, and the live stream happened. You can see it now on YouTube. If you go to the GraphQL Berlin meetup page, it's just meetup.com/GraphQL Berlin. You look for the latest one, you'll find the link there to YouTube, and perhaps Niko, you can put that in the chat as well.
Yeah.
We talked about the enterprise events. Vladi talked about that. It is, of course, here, prisma.io/enterprise event 2021 to check out more details on that. And then finally, we have a new section to our data guide, and this is the MySQL section. So previous to this, we had a big section on Postgres, and now we've got a big section on MySQL. Lots of great content here by Justin here at Prisma, and you can check out all sorts of really cool things about MySQL in this section.
Very nice. And I think one more thing is that we also have the Prisma meetup coming up, another edition, on March 9th, I think. I'll also drop a link to the meetup page so that people can find it. I think we have really nice speakers for the upcoming one. If I'm not mistaken, it's going to be Alex Debris, who some people might know if you're interested in databases. He's a very well-recognized speaker and in general person with a lot of knowledge about databases. And then Tim, our own lead TypeScript engineer, who also has been on the show already a couple of times, will talk about Prisma in React Server components. And then finally at the meetup, the last talk will be about WASP, which is a DSL for building web apps with Prisma and React and node.js. That's also a really interesting project, actually. It recently also was launched on Hacker News and has gotten a little bit of traction. So I think that the content that we have planned for next Tuesday, is it Tuesday, March 9th?
9th is Tuesday,
yeah.
Yep.
Tuesday is also absolutely excellent, and everybody is definitely encouraged to join there.
Cool. One more tiny plug. I will be speaking at Warsaw.js on the 10th, which is Wednesday. So I forget the time exactly, but check out Warsaw.js on Twitter or Meetup. I'll be doing a talk on TypeScript. TypeScript Beyond the Basics is my talk. So what do you do with TypeScript? What can you do with TypeScript beyond just, defining some types and applying those types in various places? So yeah, if you want to go beyond the basics, come check that out.
All right. Nice. Let's pick a couple of questions from the audience and hope that we can actually answer them, because that must not necessarily be the case. But here we go. The first one from Purshad. Do you guys have a plan to support a nested create many? I don't know, to be honest. I guess with create many at the moment, you can't do nested creates as you can with the regular create. And then the question would be, can you also do that in a nested way? I don't know. I'm not even sure if we already have a feature request for that, but this is a good opportunity to explain that the best way to have these things be implemented is actually go to GitHub and make sure that there is a feature request for this particular feature that you're looking for. If it doesn't exist yet, then you're definitely encouraged to just create it yourself. And maybe if it already exists, then you can signal to us that this is important to you by leaving a thumbs up or another reaction on the issue, and ideally also leaving a comment that describes your use case for this particular feature, because this helps us internally to prioritize it. If we see that a lot of people drop comments, that an issue is getting a lot of traction, that helps us to understand that this is what the community wants, and hopefully we'll be able to put it on the roadmap. So far for the nested create many, unless you heard anything specific about this particular feature, Ryan?
No, nothing specific.
Okay. I hope it's not going to be that disappointing with all the questions now. Oh, sorry, we actually don't know. Let's take the next one. I think it was already answered through the comments, actually. Where can people find a changelog of what's going on at Prisma? So the link was already dropped in the comments. We have extensive release notes that you can find on GitHub in the main Prisma repo. So that's where you can see all the changes that happened in recent releases. And of course, for upcoming things, I already mentioned it, we have the roadmap that you can explore. More questions. When is the library for Go going to be released? You mentioned it at the release notes, Ryan, that we have the new Absurd API. So what is the state of the Prisma client Go at the moment? Do you know anything about that?
I don't know. I don't know if there's a target release, kind of like full release date. Luca might know. I don't know if Luca's in the chat. On GitHub, what do we see on GitHub? Nothing.
Yeah, we might drop the link to the client Go repo. And I think that in general, yes, it's in an alpha state, so it's definitely usable. We are actively looking for feedback for it. So while it's, of course, not recommended to use that in production yet, I think that we do have a couple of users of it already. And if you're working with Go, then it's definitely worth giving it a shot and trying it out, sharing your feedback, and telling us if it's going into the right direction or not, because it's still very early and you can actually help shape the future of this library. So definitely go ahead and explore it.
Totally. There was a question here about Nexus and the state of Nexus. Where did that one go? Here it is. How is the new Prisma Nexus plugin update going? I can tell you that it is going. If you want to update with developments, I think the best place is probably the pinned issue on the repo. I'll put it here in the chat. And I know Jason put a comment there as of, I think, 5 days ago. So you can check out the most recent activity there to get a sense of where things are at.
Exactly. And one thing that I want to mention in this context is that we are actively working on it. I actually saw the first kind of internal demo of it this week. And it's going into a really interesting direction. I really like it. It's going to be a little bit lower level than the t.model and t.crud that we had before. But on the other hand, what the new API is going to enable is to actually build up on top of it and rebuild things like t.model and t.crud, but in a much more flexible way than it was before. So the default, I think, will be a little bit lower level than before, but then it's going to be easier to build stuff on top of that and expose all your Prisma models via GraphQL.
You bet. I am excited. The next one here, Niko, is about multiple schemas, which I think the answer to this is it's not possible to have multiple schemas at the current time, but I don't know. Has anything changed here? I don't think anything has.
Let's see, a database with multiple schemas. So I assume that's a Postgres database where there are multiple kind of Postgres schemas in there, if I understand correctly. And is it possible to dynamically connect to each schema based on a request parameter? Well, I think one thing that could help is that you can instantiate Prisma Client with a specific connection URL. So in theory, you could instantiate a new Prisma Client for a new request for a particular Postgres schema. And that should enable you to have to target a specific schema based on a certain request. If I understand that question correctly, that could be possible. But that also sounds like an interesting use case that you might want to actually raise as a GitHub discussion and explain in a little bit more detail. And then our support team can pick it up and hopefully give you some more detailed advice.
Yeah, I think, and the initial way that I read it, maybe I misread it, was like if you want to do multiple schemas connect to multiple different schemas from a single Prisma instance. Like you can't really do that. Like for example, you can't have multiple schema files to start with, right? That's not supported. But you also couldn't do like have n number of schemas and then connect to them dynamically or whatever from a single instance.
Yeah, that might be. There are like certainly still a couple of limitations when it comes to working with multiple schemas and multiple databases. Always depends on what concretely you want to do, and then potentially there might also be some hacks that you can employ to achieve a certain thing.
You bet. We should mention actually, because if the topic or if the reason of interest here is for like a multi-tenant setup, there is a community plugin or adapter or something, right? That I've seen before. Do you know the one? I think you showed it to me. There's like a Prisma multi-tenant thing. Where?
Yeah.
Do you remember where that is? Because that might be helpful.
I'll just try to find the link. 1 second. I think I have it. One for Prisma 2 because there's also one for Prisma 1. But yes, I think that's it. I'll drop it in the chat.
Thank you.
There is the multi-tenant library if you want to build a multi-tenant application with Prisma. All right. Are you going to release a plugin for WebStorm? Unfortunately, I don't think that this is planned at the moment. I wonder if there is already a feature request for this. If not, then again, this is a great opportunity to create a new one and tell us that this is important to you. I could see ourselves building a plugin for WebStorm as well. But as far as I know, there is a community maintained plugin. So while it's not from officially maintained by us, by the Prisma team, there should be one that hopefully already helps with a couple of workflows in your developer experience. Another question here from Christian. Is it on time for a mentioned release date? Q2, I think, was said. Is there context to the question? About the plugin. I think it's pretty much on time. I hope that we can make the first prototype public towards the end of Q1 already, probably in more of an alpha state. But I see that there is interest in this topic in general. So I'll encourage Jason also, who's working on the plugin, to post an update about this early next week.
Awesome. Taffman has congratulations for us. Thank you, Taffman. 100K downloads in NPM. That's awesome.
All right. That's a great way to wrap up, I think. That's all the questions, I think. So let's leave it with that and see you in 2 weeks again, Ryan. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.
I'm excited to see your haircut. Have fun.
Cheers.